In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, is a turf war brewing between Apple and Facebook? Apple takes another shot at the social network at its Worldwide Developers Conference. Why it is part of a larger break in practices and policies from both companies. Plus, former Apple and Google executive Tony Fadell joins us to talk about Apple's moves to curb tech addiction and whether he thinks other tech giants will follow suit. And Match Group CEO Mandy Ginsberg joins us, what she thinks about Facebook trying to get in on online dating. First, to our top story. Tim Cook personally called out Facebook in the midst of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, saying he wouldn't be in the social network's position given Apple's approach to privacy. Zuckerberg responded by calling Cook's remarks extremely glib. Now Apple has done it again, this time at its annual Worldwide Developers Conference, showcasing a new system that will make it more difficult for companies to gather data on users as they surf the web. In Apple software updates later this year, the Safari web browser will show a pop-up window asking users for permission before loading share buttons from social networks, including Facebook. This announcement came the same day that Facebook disputed a New York Times report about how it shares data with mobile phone makers. The report claims Facebook struck deals with device manufacturers that allowed them full access to information on users and their friends. Joining us now from Washington, Stephanie Miller, analyst at Hite Capital Markets. With me here in the studio, we've got our Bloomberg Tech executive editor, Tom Giles. Stephanie, I want to start with you. Apple Senior Vice President Craig Federighi said this was Apple's answer to clever and relentless data companies, and saying that this would make it dramatically more difficult for them to gather data on us. Is this going to hurt Facebook?
It's hard for me to imagine that it will, in the same way that it's been hard for me to imagine any of this news could really hurt Facebook. At the end of the day, people really like Facebook and they like the products and services that it offers, and so people read these stories, or they hear that Apple might be making it harder for them harder for Facebook to follow users around the web. But at the end of the day, people still use Facebook in droves.
At the end of the day, Tom, is it more symbolic?
Well, this definitely gives Apple the opportunity to claim some moral high ground, right? And Apple has done this before multiple times. They had the standoff with the FBI. They really want to be known as a company that cares about your data, cares about your privacy, and is willing to go to the mat on it. They did that with the FBI, and they've definitely made hay in light of the controversy surrounding Facebook. My question is, to what extent are people really going to pay attention when Apple gives you that opportunity to say, no thanks, don't want to share this information with Facebook? How much are people going to really take advantage of that and pay heed?
That said, these companies have two completely different business models, and Mark Zuckerberg pointed that out. Apple makes money by selling fairly high-end devices. Facebook makes money on advertising. Our Caroline Hyde spoke with Tony Fadell, a former Apple and Google executive who's been out there talking about the problems with tech addiction, the responsibility of companies like Apple. But he said that this move by Apple towards Facebook is a good one. Take a listen.
Facebook, in some ways, people are saying that they're exploiting that, and they're not being as good to their customers or their users as they should be. And so I think this war is ever going to be there of, are you serving your user or are you serving your advertiser customer? And I think that, Apple is taking the high road here, saying it's about security and privacy and not being tracked. And I think they're absolutely right about that. And we can see what Facebook's doing in the press about apologizing and trying to fix things. I think they have a long way to go.
Stephanie, let's talk about the bigger picture here. Now that we also had this New York Times report that Facebook shared user data, friend data with phone makers without disclosing it. If public trust is degraded in Facebook and yet people continue to use it anyway, at some point are those people a flight risk down the line? Are they likely to use the next best thing that comes along if their trust in Facebook and their, how much they like Facebook continues to decline?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's hard to see right now with so many users, and part of the currency of Facebook is the network of users. So it's not just going, if I left Facebook because I didn't like it, I couldn't get those connections on another platform. And so it's really hard to replicate. The company's made a number of acquisitions, and one can argue that these acquisitions, such as WhatsApp, are helping its bottom line. But at the end of the day, a lot of its growth and a lot of its power comes from its organic growth as a company that connects people, which is what Mark Zuckerberg truly believes is the mission of this company. So it's really hard to imagine a competitor in that social network space being a viable option right now.
Tom, what do you make of Facebook's response to this particular story? They're really pushing back hard on it. They say they merely gave this information to manufacturers so that they could recreate Facebook-like experiences. One of the partners was Apple, and Tim Cook was on NPR talking about how we're not in the data business. We were just trying to make it easier for people to share a photo.
Right, we're not really doing anything with that information. I mean, the stakes are high right now for Facebook. It's very much in the crosshairs of a lot of lawmakers. We haven't talked about what they said because they want to know, were we lied to? Was Mark Zuckerberg, when he came and testified in DC several weeks back, was he telling the truth and being upfront about who has access to information on Facebook, these third parties, these device makers, et cetera? Two, they're concerned about the consent decree. The FTC has handed down some ruling in 2011, and the question is whether these types of arrangements whereby device manufacturers do have access to certain information, are able to cull that information, is that something that is in violation of the FTC rulings, which could end up costing Facebook money, not so much money that it's going to hurt the company, but again, it's a PR nightmare. Generally speaking, you are talking about a reputational damage that continues to happen and chip away at the company. So far, remember, Sheryl and Zuck have been very, very clear about saying this hasn't cost us hasn't cost us customers yet. The question is, if you keep hammering away at it, will it eventually happen?
Stephanie, do you think this violates that FTC consent decree? Is Facebook going to face a fine?
Yeah, I think probably they've violated that consent decree many different ways. First with the Cambridge Analytica developments, and now this. The biggest fine that the FTC has handed out to date is $100 million. So if they wanted to make waves, they could do a record-setting fine, say, of $5 billion on Facebook. That's a rounding error to this company that had $40 billion cash on hand in 2017. So I do think there will be regulatory action. I do think it will feel meaningful to regulators, and I do agree there's reputational risk at stake. But from when I talk to investors, who cares?
Exactly. So, Tom, for $5 billion for a company of the size of Facebook, no big.
Not a big deal, exactly. And the question is, is there a viable alternative? If you leave Facebook, where do you go? And as we've talked about before, if you leave Facebook, a lot of people, where do they go? Well, they're going to Instagram. Well, guess who owns Facebook, right? So. And Twitter doesn't serve the same social purpose as Facebook.
Let's talk about the alternatives, Stephanie. I mean, we have for years talked about, whether teens, are as attracted to Facebook as they once were, and there actually is some evidence that among younger users, Facebook is or has already lost its cool. What are some trends you're seeing in the younger demographic?
I think actually for many demographics, the richer content, whether it's photos or video, is what's most interesting and captures people's attention the most. And so this is the point. Facebook is building out those platforms on its own, branded platform, but also on Instagram and others. I think WhatsApp, even though it's not it's not like a social network tool per se, but it does help connect people for free. And maybe that's not as big of a deal in the United States when we are a big company with one network, but in a place like Europe that's facing different types of regulations, the ability to communicate via WhatsApp across a disparate continent of a number of different countries it actually provides some security for Facebook among skeptical users on that continent and here as well.
Tom, we're looking at potentially more regulation, especially in Europe. Is it going to happen?
Definitely. I mean, I think we are seeing an era where, particularly in Europe, you're going to find European regulators are going to find some creative way to make us think about privacy in a different way. In Germany, they're already talking about how, to what extent can we talk about privacy as an antitrust issue? Can we kind of repackage this idea of anti-competitive behavior and saying to Facebook, well, you can't force us to give up our privacy in exchange for letting us have access to your social network on which you have a monopoly. So I do think there's going to be some inventive, creative ways. You're hearing more and more about different approaches to antitrust here in the U.S. Again, though, everyone we talk to, analysts, investors alike, do see the prospect of regulation, but they see it as kind of, hurting Facebook around the edges, not really striking at the heart of its business model. And when you talk about Facebook's business model, advertisers, if they want to reach that mass of hundreds of millions of users, billions, when you add them up in total, where else are you going to be able to go? So advertisers really do still want to reach audiences through the Facebook platform, through the Google platform. Duopoly very much in place. Facebook is thinking about alternative business models. That Sarah Fryer broke the story about how they're wondering, they're exploring whether or not you want to have people, say if you don't want to see ads, there's going to be some other way that you can compensate
Pay
Facebook.
For a subscription.
Exactly. I'm not sure how popular that would end up being, but it would give people who are really concerned about privacy another way to continue to access Facebook. Does Facebook replicate the full amount of revenue? Who knows? I mean, subscription models are working for a lot of people.
All right. Our Bloomberg Tech executive editor, Tom Giles, and Stephanie Miller, analyst at Height Capital Markets. Thank you both.
Thanks.
Coming up, our exclusive interview with Match Group CEO Mandy Ginsberg, how the company is responding to Facebook's push to launch its own dating services next. This is Bloomberg. Just last month, at Facebook's annual F8 event, the company announced it would be rolling out a new dating feature. A fairly bold move as the social network tries to win back public trust over how the company collects and uses customer data.
It's going to be in the Facebook app, but it's totally optional. It's opt-in. If you want, you can make a dating profile. And I know a lot of you are going to have questions about this, so I want to be clear that we have designed this with privacy and safety in mind from the beginning. Your friends aren't going to see your profile. You're only going to be suggested people who are not your friends, who have opted into dating, who fit your preferences.
Lot of disclaimers there, Mark Zuckerberg. Match Group owns the dating apps Tinder, Match, OkCupid, Plenty of Fish, and Our Time. Shares fell more than 10% on that news. That is the most since November 2016. But the company says it's not worried about Facebook putting the moves on its business. According to data from Piper Jaffray, millennials are using Twitter more than any other dating app. Joining us now, Mandy Ginsberg, Match Group CEO. So why aren't you worried?
Well, I mean, we've been in the dating business for 20 plus years, and I mean, our philosophy is that every day we come to work every day, and if we can deliver great products and deliver what people are looking for is to connect and meet, then we shouldn't be as the market leader. But I do think that for our biggest growth engine, which is Tinder, which is really the 20-somethings, I think there's sort of two facts. That one is that I'm not sure if 20-somethings are going to go to Facebook to date, so I don't think it's going to get impacted. And then two, what we've seen is that people really do want to separate their dating lives from Facebook.
So you put out a pretty snarky statement when Facebook announced this, and I know that you've been an important developer for them and actually worked with Facebook on dating features in the past. Do you feel betrayed, or is there any bad blood there?
No, I mean, so we've got deep partnerships with Facebook even today, both on the advertising side and on the development side, and so we work with Facebook all the time. I don't think it's hugely surprising. We see in our data, because we survey about every quarter thousands of single people in America, and we see that people meet and connect on Facebook all the time. It's just more implicit, and now at this point they're launching something a little bit more explicit. So we'll see what they do.
So that said, Facebook is 2 billion people, and even though they're having all these problems, 2 billion people still seem to be using it, I mean, that's a lot. They have a lot of data on a lot of people that could be put to helping match people up. I mean, doesn't the scale or potential scale of it concern you?
It's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because what we found, and I've been in the dating category for over 10 years, is that we really grown through product innovation and then just chipping away at that stigma year after year. And there's still a lot of people who are resisting the category. And so if we have the ability, particularly for older users internationally, to say, wow, Facebook's doing it, maybe it'll open up more people and people will be more open to trying a dating app. And then we see that people use 3 to 4 dating apps at a time. So it's not a one-size-fits-all industry for sure.
So I want to ask you a bigger philosophical question. Do you think online dating is good for society? I mean, it seems like it would be hard to deal with swiping left and swiping right, and being a millennial right now would be kind of stressful.
Well, I mean, I think that,
that's the silver lining for me not being a millennial.
Before Tinder, people in their 20s they weren't on dating apps. They would, they'd meet at bars and restaurants and they'd meet out. And so I think what Tinder did and other apps have done is just open people up to so many more possibilities.
But can it make dating harder or worse?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you still have to meet for a beer or a coffee, and you have to see if there's chemistry. And so I think that, that doesn't change.
But now you've got 30 other people in your pocket.
Well, and you also have to think about not just, this millennial dating, but you have to think that, for people, matches ages 30 to 50, and if you get divorced and you're 45 and you're working all the time, how are you going to meet people? And so I think it's created such an opportunity for people to meet people that they literally never would have met otherwise. And you had mentioned Our Time, which is our 50+ app too. I said, you're 50+, where are you going to meet people? It's very hard with your social circle. So my goal, CEO of the company, is that we really open up those opportunities for every age group.
Now, people's views of online dating are directly correlated to the level of success they had. So I fully understand that. Some people have said, well, I've been on Match for 10 years and it hasn't changed. Where is the innovation in online dating going to come from?
I mean, I think we're constantly innovating on all of our products. I mean, if you look at, what you've seen in the last probably three quarters, we've launched location on Match, which is misconnections, where you can see use cross paths. We've launched location on Tinder, which we just launched recently. We're launching video units, so you can get a much better sense of who people are. And we feel like at every single one of our products, you've got to constantly innovate. And ultimately, the holy grail is to figure out, how do you predict if you're going to have chemistry when you meet face to face? And all the product innovation is around helping people get a better sense of if someone's going to be interesting to them.
So Match and Bumble don't seem to have chemistry at this point. You've sued Bumble for patent infringement, arguing that Bumble and Tinder are, basically almost identical. And Bumble responded saying, "Dear Match Group, we swipe left on you. We swipe left on your multiple attempts to buy us, copy us, intimidate us." What's your response to that?
Well, so I took over in January, and later in last year, at the end of the year, we were granted a patent, which we felt really great about. And this patent allowed us to protect our IP for Tinder, where you swipe and then you can unlock communication. So this is this opt-in that we've talked about. And so, after we were granted that patent, which was a big coup for us, we really we wanted to make sure we protected our IP. So there's multiple businesses that we sued, and Bumble was one of them. And we feel like it's just important to protect the IP of the people who are working hard to create real innovation on the products. And
yet you did try to buy them. Would you still want to acquire Bumble?
I think that Bumble's done a great job of building a brand, especially in the U.S. And we've over the last decade been a highly acquisitive business, and we talk to businesses all the time. So you never know, and I think that we look at great businesses, and they've created a good business.
So that's not a no, for sure. What about Hinge? Another one in that sort of niche market.
Yeah, Hinge has gotten some really interesting traction, particularly in the New York market, among some other markets. And I think that there is a real hunger and appetite for people who are looking. Now, Tinder brought all these new people into the category, and now as people are aging, they're looking for something a little bit more serious. They're looking for all sorts of different options, and Hinge is an example of an app that's a little bit more serious.
Or could you build it?
Well, we look at sort of three different ways to grow our existing businesses, The second thing is incubate, and we incubate inside of Match Group. So we've got an incubation team that's working on 3 or 4 big projects, and not just in the U.S. but globally. And then the third one is acquisition, and we are constantly looking at acquisition, not just in the U.S. but where I think we still see some real opportunity is the Asian market. There's stigmas eroding, and I think there's a lot of growth and opportunity there. And society is changing their view on dating.
So what does the future of dating look like?
Well, I think that I feel like I'm in the best business because at the end of the day, I get to allow people to connect and meet and have babies and get married. They never would have met otherwise, and so
or swipe left,
or swipe left and say no to people. But for us, we really are around. It's really about creating that chemistry. So what are the inventions we can build? And I think there's going to be a lot more video. I think location is going to be key, and the power of location, I think, is going to be really critical to a lot of apps. So I think the future's bright.
All right, Mandy Ginsberg, CEO of Match Group. Thanks so much for stopping by. Coming up, sky high, how British lawmakers may have cleared the way to finally resolve the drama of who gets to buy Sky. That is next. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network at TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Fox has gotten approval in the UK for its takeover bid of Sky Media. UK lawmakers said Fox's $15.6 billion acquisition can go through, provided it sells off Sky's news division. The move could pave the way for Fox to increase its bid for Sky to keep rival suitor Comcast at bay. Rupert Murdoch has said he plans to then sell Sky to Disney as part of a $52 billion sale of most of Fox, which Comcast is also trying to buy. Snap has a new company executive, and he comes from its new favorite recruiting ground, Amazon. The social media company hired Derek Anderson to be its new vice president of finance, a role he previously held at Amazon. Anderson will report to Snap's new CFO, Tim Stone, who you guessed came from Amazon. Dutch payment processing firm Aiden BV is heading towards one of the biggest European fintech IPOs in years. Shareholders plan to raise $1.1 billion when it lists on June 13th, valuing Aiden between $7.1 and $8.3 billion. Aiden's payment software will soon add eBay to an impressive list of tech giants, including Netflix, Uber, and Facebook. eBay had previously been a partner of Aiden's rival, PayPal. Coming up, a U.S. State Department report warns the government needs to overhaul its strategies on cyber attacks. Our conversation with CrowdStrike CEO George Kurtz next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Being hacked, even just the threat of a cyber attack, is enough to keep companies and customers up at night. Take, for example, the Bank of England, where a new internal watchdog report has identified cyber attacks as a major risk that could lead to the demise of the institution. And on this side of the Atlantic, a new U.S. State Department report that says the government needs to overhaul its strategies for stopping cyber attacks. That's coupled with concerns that U.S. elections are increasingly at risk in the current primaries and ahead of November's midterm elections. For more on this and the state of cybersecurity around the world, I want to get to Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde in London with a special guest. Caroline?
Yeah, special guest, Emily, is none other than George Kurtz. He is the CEO of CrowdStrike, which is helping analyze all these threats that, whether it's governments, whether it's electoral systems, indeed whether it's banks that are exposed. Talk to us first about US elections, the midterms, November. What sort of threats are you seeing ahead of that, and where are the actors coming from?
Well, when we think about the electoral process, they're highly targeted from actors around the globe, whether it's any of the major countries. Certainly, Russia's been active in the past. And I think what most people need to be concerned about is protecting that process and making sure that the results aren't skewed, whether it's electronic results or whether it's even kind of skewing what people think about the electoral process and who they're voting for. And we've seen a lot of that in the past.
And so how does a company like CrowdStrike get employed? Are you hearing more from governments, for example, in particular from the US in terms ahead of the elections? Is this a new area of demand or not so much?
I think a lot of governments are well aware of the problem now, and they're certainly trying to take precautions.
What precautions can they take?
Well, you know, when you think about the process, there's two areas. One is the voting machines themselves. Some obviously are paper ballots, but a lot of the voting is going to electronic voting, so making sure that's protected, as well as just kind of the reconnaissance of what's happening behind the scenes and making sure that the election process is fair and it's not influenced one way or another.
Reconnaissance. Talk to us about reconnaissance. I mean, talk to us about what it is that CrowdStrike just does to be able to alert to any sort of anomaly, because you're sifting through, what, 100 billion bits of data?
Yeah, we actually collect 100 billion discrete events per day. And in the span of 2 days, we handle more events than Twitter has tweets in a year. So it's a massive amount of data that we have to sift through. And ultimately, what we're doing using machine learning and artificial intelligence is trying to find the bad stuff before people even know that it's actually bad, which ultimately protects our customers from breaches.
How many breaches would one see, or how many bits of bad would you see per day?
Well, we see 100 million events, we see millions of bad things that happen, and on average we stop about 3 breaches per hour. That's kind of the distillation of what we do. But there's a lot more malware that we block and lots of events that happen. But at the end of the day, customers are really trying to prevent against those breaches.
And where are the banks, for example? We're talking about the Bank of England here in the UK, saying, look, we are trying to track banks at the moment about their openness to cyber attacks and the demise that we would see. Where are the threats coming from? Are they individuals? Are they state-sponsored? What are corporates such as banks having to look for at the moment?
Well, I think when you look at banks, they're obviously highly targeted just because that's where the money's at.
Yeah.
And whether it's e-crime, whether it's nation state, whether it's even North Korea has been targeting some of the bank and the banking system.
Why?
Well, when you can't get money in and out of the country, if you can basically get it from ransomware and other means, it's a way to fund some of the efforts. So.
Is it easy to distinguish when it is a nation state or just a lone actor who happens to be based in North Korea?
It's actually really hard now. The lines are blurring. It used to be more well-defined of nation-state actors, how they actually operate and what they do in e-crime. And, even the e-crime actors now are taking some of the weaponry, if you will, the vulnerabilities that have been disclosed by governments, weaponizing that and delivering that as ransomware.
So is ransomware, that's been such a hot talking point, is that the main area that I need to be as an individual wary of, or corporates need to be wary of? What are the key threats that you're seeing, and how are they changing throughout the course of 2018?
Well, there's certainly the financial threat, whether that's getting your credentials compromised and having someone log into your bank account. That's one area we see a lot of what we call business email compromises, which
Phishing.
is, it's kind of a fake email. It looks like it came from the CEO to the CFO saying wire money. And then we see ransomware where, obviously in Europe and UK and other places and the US, lots of big companies have been hit by that and knocked offline for many weeks at a time. I mean, massive amount, millions and millions of pounds of damage from ransomware. What's
interesting is in the UK and EU wide more broadly, we've seen tougher regulation come in about when one experiences a breach. GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, saying, look, you've got to alert your users within 72 hours. How reasonable is it to expect that a company can be alerted, can know, and can quickly ensure that they've alerted the regulators?
Well, if they can instrument their endpoints and they have good visibility, they can identify that very quickly, and that's going to be really an important concept because that's where the action's at, their computers, their desktops, and their servers, and things that work in the cloud. So that can be done with the right technology, but I think what's going to be interesting there is when we think about ransomware, I mean, you have a massive fine, 4% of revenue, and then you have e-crime on the other end saying, well, what if I basically charge a company £5 million instead of them paying a £50 million fine? Will they do it, right? And I think there's going to be some interesting examples of companies being tested to not disclose information when that happens.
Wow, that's going to be a tough one for them to contend with. What about infrastructure hacking as well? We were just, you mentioned North Korea earlier about how they're going for the banks, for example. Sure. They're also going for infrastructure. You said you've noted it in the United States. How do you end up knowing that it's North Korea behind it? And what are they wanting to do with, is it just disruption that they want to cause? Is it power that they want to cause? Well, what is it?
Well, any nation-state actors have various motivations. First is information gathering, which is obvious. The second one is maintaining a strategic advantage if there was a conflict. So being able to implant malware as an example, that they could activate that would actually disrupt those critical infrastructure systems. So that's basically why they're doing it. In terms of how hard it is to figure out who's who, as I said earlier, it's becoming more and more difficult to figure out, is it nation state, is it e-crime, who is it? There's various means of looking at infrastructure and malware and the delivery mechanism to try to associate who's doing what, but it's more of, it's part art and part science.
Well, we'll see you get that balancing act going forward. Art and science, it seems. George Kurtz, CEO of CrowdStrike, making art a science and science and art, potentially. Emily.
Caroline Hyde in London, thank you so much. Well, at the Bloomberg Invest Summit in New York, noted short seller Carson Block said fraudulent Chinese companies pose a risk to U.S. markets and that investors should weigh whether to allocate capital to them. He also thinks China's AI market has caught up to the United States.
China's artificial intelligence is apparently on par with that of the U.S. And this is obviously a major area of strategic competition. This is about the future. Also, according to that report, the entity in China that has the leading development of AI is Baidu. Okay, well, this is our strategic competitor. And again, at the end of the day, none of these companies will act solely as private companies.
Coming up, Apple moves to help curb tech addiction. We will hear from a tech leader who's been championing the cause. Next to Tim Cook, Tony Fadell joins us on the show next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio, listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. At the Worldwide Developers Conference this week, Apple rolled out new features to curb the length of time its customers use its devices, including time limits that will switch some apps off and new parental controls. The man who helped start the smartphone revolution at Apple has been speaking out about the dangers of tech addiction for quite some time. Tony Fadell, a former Apple and Google executive who is now a principal at Future Shape, joined Caroline Hyde from Paris earlier to weigh in.
It's a great step forward for the customers, for the industry to really address and acknowledge that there may be an issue. We had Tim Cook actually going on record saying that he was very surprised once he got the tools at how much he was using his devices, more so than he thought. And so I think now it's no longer an open secret. We're all talking about it, and we're moving ahead with these new tools, such as Screen Time from Apple. So I think it's a great first step, but I think there's still a lot more we can do and should do, because this is a problem that's not going to go away anytime soon.
What further steps could be taken then?
Well, interestingly, if you look at it, what the data they're going to be telling you about how much you're using these devices is really just about your iPhone and your iPad together, which is great. It's combining the two. But it's not actually going into your time on a computer. If you look at it, most adults and older kids, they actually are spending 30 to 50% or even more time on a computer. So to only have one part of your digital life being represented by that data, along with how you use your connected TV or your connected watch, all of those things need to be put into this data package for transparency to see how much you're really using devices in general, not just the ones in your pocket.
And what about going across platform? How do you see that working out? Because many don't just have one particular Apple product. They might have an Android as well in a different format.
Well, that's a really interesting question, and I think that's something we're going to have to grapple with. But if you look at it, for the most part, most people are Android platform or their Apple platform or what have you. So right there, if we can fix that, that's 2 billion users that we could get going. But you're right, we do need to address that. That's going to be a little bit more difficult because it requires the two companies really working together on platforms and those kinds of things. But hopefully that might happen over time.
I mean, in many parts, this was your advice. You said that you were having conversations with those on the inside of Apple about these concerns of yours. Did they really action what you advised? Are you still having conversations? Did you speak to Tim Cook himself?
Well, I over email I did, but I also spoke to the other people who work with Tim that I've known for years, and so I don't know if it was based on my advice or what they were already working on. But it was really great to see these kinds of steps being taken. But again, I think we need to go further, and that means that these new tools need to also be available to third parties. So APIs and data for APIs for control and data, so that third parties can create specific solutions for different types of people who have different types of needs. Apple can't make these kinds of specific differences in the platform, but that's why they have the App Store, to allow third parties to make customized things. So you could think of a digital Weight Watchers, right? Or being able to combine your physical activity with your digital activity in one calendar. Apple's not providing that today, and maybe they don't need to do all that, but they should allow the third parties to be able to make access to it so that we can get a more robust solution for various different needs.
Talk to us about other third parties. Interestingly, there seems to have been some tension brewing in many respects between Facebook and Apple. And in WWDC, we saw a demo of at Facebook.com being blocked, or indeed some of the cookies there within via the Apple new products. How do you see that falling out?
Well, I think if you look at it, really, there is a set of companies who are in the position to really enable security and privacy of your data and your devices, and that's companies like Apple, right? And Facebook, in some ways, people are saying that they're exploiting that, and they're not being as good to their customers or their users as they should be. And so I think this war is ever going to be there of, are you serving your user or are you serving your advertiser customer? And I think that Apple is taking the high road here, saying it's about security and privacy and not being tracked. And I think they're absolutely right about that. And we can see what Facebook's doing in the press about apologizing and trying to fix things. I think they have a long way to go, but I think the industry in general, not just Facebook, has a long way to go to address these kinds of issues. And we're waking up to it, and we're no longer just letting it be. We're going to be having just incredible detailed conversations about this stuff, not just here in Europe like we have with GDPR, but with all kinds of other regulators around the world, because they're going to want to know how this is being, the consumers are being protected.
How are you concerned about your own data? You've said before that your own children aren't allowed to use social media apps to a certain extent. What would it take to hear from Facebook and other social media companies for you to feel more at ease about your privacy, or is it a regulatory reaction that you're waiting for?
I think, for my children, obviously they're not old enough yet, but as time progresses, they're going to have to earn the trust again of the parents as well as the other consumers who use their service. So as far as I'm concerned, to rebuild trust takes a long time, and they're going to have to be very transparent, very upfront with people about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and live by those rules. And it might take quarters and years to actually win users back or get new users on because of this. But Facebook's not the only one. There's many other culprits out there. They just happen to be the lightning rod right now.
Interestingly, Facebook came back at what Apple had been saying at WWDC and called it cute virtue signaling. Do you think Apple's gone further than just a cute virtue signal?
I don't want to really comment about that because I'm not on either side of it. But at the end of the day, everybody's going to trade jabs in this industry, and some are right, some are wrong, some are for media purposes. So let's let those games play out. But what we really need are solutions, real solutions to this, as opposed to just firing back and forth on PR statements.
Are you slightly surprised by this game that seems to be brewing in Silicon Valley, or not so much?
It ebbs and flows, of my 25 years in Silicon Valley, there's egos involved, and people are taking real hard stances. I think when the government's peering in and customers are peering in, it's easy to be able to make your position well known and take some shots along the way. So it's just business as usual, and I think there's much more at risk these days. And it's not about companies and share prices. It's really about you and your privacy and security, and I think it's worth these kinds of battles, even if sometimes they are less than professional in a way.
As you mentioned before, you feel Apple is taking the high road here. Do you think it could become a selling point for Apple's products that it has taken this stance in terms of privacy, in terms of addiction?
I think, if you look at Apple through the course of history, it's always been on the right side of the user. This is just a continuation of that. And we're seeing more and more companies not stating their intentions as well. So I believe that that many customers trust Apple, trust the brand to do the right thing. They've always done it in the past. I believe they're going to do the right thing in the future. And yesterday's announcements were just along those same lines.
That was Tony Fadell, former Apple and Google executive and currently a principal at Future Shape, speaking with our Caroline Hyde. Coming up, Twitter has seen massive growth thanks to video and live streaming on its platform. So why are they reorganizing the teams in charge of these units? We will discuss next. This is Bloomberg. Beijing-based Xiaomi has enlisted 6 more Chinese banks to arrange its Hong Kong listing. The IPO is expected to be the biggest in the world in nearly 4 years. Bloomberg News reported the smartphone maker is considering seeking $10 billion from the share listing. Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley are leading the deal as so-called sponsors. Twitter has announced a broad reorg within the company. The social media platform has dissolved its live video team and consolidated the unit into its content partnerships team. Video has become a standout for Twitter. The number of daily video views has almost doubled in the last year and made up the majority of ad revenue for the last 2 quarters. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg Tech's Selena Wang, who covers the company. So video is doing well, but they're dissolving the video unit? This doesn't make sense.
It certainly comes at an incredibly strange time, especially since it's only weeks after it announced that it had inked dozens of deals with players like Disney and NBC. And of course, we have the Bloomberg TikTok news live streaming service. Now, Twitter's main line is that this doesn't impact their overall commitment to live video and that this is simply a reorganization so that they can execute on deals faster. But I have spoken with sources inside the company who say that the story is a little bit different and that there's been some internal dissension about how much they should be focusing on live video as a standalone product. As you know, Anthony Noto, the former chief operating officer, was really spearheading Twitter as becoming the future live destination for all live content. And that was really his focus on driving the future growth of the company. Now with Jack solely back at the helm, it looks like he would really like to fold live video into the broader content strategy.
So Twitter's statement, we are taking steps to streamline this organization to enable increased efficiency around the world and better align with our global strategy and vision. So does this mean more or less deals? Because as you said, they've just struck a number of deals and partnerships.
Now, some of those people who struck those deals are actually no longer at the company. The person they hired just a year ago to really spearhead this live video team has left the company. The head of news partnerships has left the company. They've shifted people around. I don't necessarily think it means that more or less deals will be struck, but it may mean that some of these brands and advertisers are less happy about the new deal and outcome that they're going to get. We haven't seen Twitter create a dedicated tab for live video. We haven't seen them make live video easier to surface. I think that from Jack's perspective, he wants the platform to be content agnostic. So it's not about if it's video, if it's live, or if it's a photo, or if it's a tweet. It's about let's get anything relevant to you, surface to your feed, and let's not focus on specific content areas.
Meantime, Twitter was added to the S&P 500, so good news there. Analysts are mixed on the stock, but it's still up more than 60% so far this year. With Twitter, you never know. The winds are always changing. But do you think we could see an inflection point in investor sentiment?
I don't think this reorganization alone will see an inflection point. I think there has been a sort of change of tides in terms of sentiment among investors and analysts about this company over really the past 6 months to a year as they have started to execute on a lot of the promises that they were making. The platform is in fact easier to use. They are doing a better job of streamlining the content that's delivered to people. I do think that this reorganization does raise some questions though about the commitment they have to video, which is driving now more than half of their advertising revenue, and to the brands and partners that have already signed on to dedicate a lot of resources to the platform.
So what's next for Twitter?
What's next for Twitter? Well, I have been hearing that they've been working very hard on some product changes, so I'm expecting that they're going to unveil something new in the near future. They have also been executing on this Ads Transparency Center that Facebook has also been hard at work on. They're really gearing up for the midterm elections. They need to make sure that all of the candidates are verified. They need to tamp down on bots and content that is trying to impact and manipulate the type of conversation that's happening on the platform. And as Jack has been saying over and over again, he wants Twitter to be a happy, healthy, and nice place again, which it hasn't been.
Another year, another test for Twitter. Okay, Selena Wang of Bloomberg Tech, thanks so much. I should mention Bloomberg LP operates a global breaking news network on Twitter called TikTok. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Tomorrow we will bring you reaction and analysis following Tesla's annual shareholder meeting and talk to a leading Tesla investor on Elon Musk's strategy ahead. That is all for now. This is Bloomberg.